Everyone in town said there was a market hidden at the edge of the forest. Cheap, fresh, always open at night. That was all Rio knew when he decided to find it. It was past midnight when he left home, carrying a small bag and a thin wallet. The streets of his village were quiet and dark, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. At the edge of town, just where the houses ended and the trees began, there was a narrow dirt road. He followed it. The deeper he walked, the stranger it felt. The trees grew taller, blacker. A low mist had the ground, chilling his feet and clinging to his pants. Somewhere far ahead, he heard faint music, the clinking notes of a gamelan, soft and eerie. And then, without warning, he saw it. Lanterns, dozens of glowing lanterns hung from thin poles, marking the entrance to a narrow lane lined with stalls. Each stall was stacked with goods, fish so fresh they glistened, vegetables green and dewy, spices that filled the air with a heady aroma. People moved through the market, quiet and fast, their faces hard to see in the half light. No one spoke. Rio swallowed his nerves and stepped forward. He walked past a table piled with red chilies, past a vendor cutting herbs with long, pale fingers, past a man arranging fish on banana leaves. Every stall was full of the freshest ingredients Rio had ever seen, but what caught his attention most was the price. Only 1,000. A voice murmured. He turned. A vendor stood behind a table of vegetables, staring at him with deep, dark eyes. Her lips barely moved as she repeated herself, only 1,000. Rio hesitated. He reached into his wallet and placed a small bill on the table. The vendor handed him a bag, her cold fingers brushing against his skin. He moved on. Every stall he stopped at, it was the same. No matter what he bought, fish, rice, oil, sugar, the price was always the same, always 1,000. It was impossible. Back in the city, he'd never find produce as fresh for 10 times the price. Yet here he was, walking through a dreamlike market, his arms growing heavier with bags full of goods, and his wallet hardly lighter at all. The mist thickened, the music grew fainter, but still he walked, drawn deeper into the maze of glowing lanterns and whispering vendors. And as he turned down another lane, he thought, just for a second, that he saw something off. A vendor with a neck too long, a shopper with arms too thin, a child crouched in the shadows, its face hidden, giggling softly. Rio froze. The hairs on his arms stood on end, but no one else seemed to notice. Everyone around him just kept moving, silent and efficient, their pale faces bowed over their goods. He gripped his bags tighter and forced himself to keep walking. He told himself it was fine, that nothing bad could come of this, that he was just lucky. He didn't yet know that tonight was the beginning of something far worse than just a bargain. Rio's bags were heavy now, too heavy. His arms ached as he trudged deeper into the market, the mist swirling around his legs. The faint clink of gamelan notes still floated in the air, but softer now, distorted. He stopped at a quiet corner and set the bags down for a moment. His fingers were stiff, numb from the chill of the handles cutting into his skin. He flexed them, trying to warm them up, and that's when he noticed that the bags were cold, not just cold, icy. His breath caught as he untied one of them and peeked inside. The fish he'd bought earlier didn't look the same anymore. Its scales were gray, dull. Its cloudy eyes stared up at him, and Rio swore its mouth moved, like it was whispering something he couldn't hear. He dropped the bag and stumbled back. The fish lay still again. No one around him reacted. Nobody even looked at him. Rio grabbed the bag and kept walking. Faster now. He needed to get out. He had enough. But the more he walked, the more the market twisted. The rows of stalls seemed longer now, the turns sharper, the alleys darker. Every corner looked the same. Pale-faced vendors, silent shoppers, lanterns swaying in a wind he couldn't feel. He should have reached the edge of the forest by now, but he hadn't. Ahead of him, the narrow path forked into 2 more alleys, then those split into 3, then 4. The walls of the market closed in tighter and tighter. Panic rose in his throat. He spun around to retrace his steps, but the way he'd come was already swallowed by fog. And then he saw him. At the far end of the lane stood the old man, the same one who had handed him his first bag of vegetables, the one with the white, empty eyes and the thin, hollow smile. The old man raised one bony finger and pointed to the right. A darker alley, barely lit. Rio hesitated. His instinct screamed to run the other way, but there was no other way. His legs moved almost on their own, following the old man's gesture. This alley was narrower than the others, darker. The air here felt thicker, harder to breathe. Each step was a struggle, like wading through something heavy and unseen. At the end of the alley stood a gate, wooden, ancient, with dried palm leaves strung across the top. Above it hung a cracked wooden sign painted with strange black symbols. He couldn't read them, but they filled him with a deep, sinking dread. Beyond the gate was nothing but fog, dense, swirling fog and faint, strange whispers. Rio froze in place. Behind him, he heard the old man's voice, close now, almost in his ear. If you've paid, keep walking. Don't stop. Rio turned. No one was there. The market behind him was still full of people, none of them looking his way. His hands gripped the heavy, freezing bags tighter. His chest rose and fell in shallow, shaky breaths. And then, with no other choice, he took a step through the gate. The whispers grew louder. The chill cut straight to his bones, and the market behind him fell utterly silent. The fog on the other side of the gate clung to his skin like icy fingers. Rio stumbled forward, his feet sinking into soft, damp earth. The air here was different, colder, heavier, and laced with the faint scent of something metallic. The whispers swirled around him, countless voices speaking all at once, too fast to understand. Every few seconds, he thought he heard his own name, hissed from the shadows. Rio. Rio. He tightened his grip on the bags, now heavier than ever. They seemed to pull him down with every step, as though something inside was alive and resisting. And then he saw it. The fog parted just enough to reveal a clearing. In the middle stood a long wooden table. His bags, all of them, were already there, neatly arranged on top, as if someone had been waiting for him. Rio froze, his heart hammering. Figures stood behind the table, dozens of them, the vendors from the market. But now he could see them clearly. Their skin was almost translucent, stretched thin over their bones. Their eyes were hollow and black, their mouths curved into smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They all stared at him, silent, waiting. And then he noticed something even stranger. At the end of the table stood a mirror, small, cracked, propped up on a wooden frame. Something in his gut told him not to look, but he couldn't help himself. Slowly, he stepped forward, and when he finally looked into the mirror, his breath caught in his chest. The reflection staring back at him wasn't quite his own. It was paler, his eyes darker, his lips dry and cracked. His hands, when had they become so white, so brittle? Thin black lines spiderwebbed across his skin like veins filled with ink. He staggered back, but the reflection stayed where it was and smiled. Behind him, the faint sound of footsteps made him turn. The tall man was there, the one with the wide-brimmed hat that hid his face. He stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. Slowly, he raised his bony hand and pointed to the table. A dry, rasping whisper floated through the fog. It's all yours now. You've paid. The figures behind the table all tilted their heads, their smiles widening. Take what's yours, the voice said again. Rio looked back at the bags on the table, at the mirror, at his hands. His throat felt dry. For the first time since he'd set foot in this place, he began to understand that nothing here was free, that this bargain had a cost far worse than money. And yet, he still reached for the bags, because what else could he do? Rio's fingers closed around the nearest bag. It was cold to the touch, colder than before, so cold it burned. He winced but didn't let go. Behind the table, the vendors watched in silence. their black, empty eyes fixed on him. One by one, their brittle smiles grew wider, their heads tilting slightly as if to approve. The tall man remained at the edge of the clearing, his face still hidden by the wide hat. He raised one long, bony finger and pointed to the rest of the bags. "Take them all," the dry whisper came again. Rio's throat tightened. His skin prickled as he reached for the second bag, then the third, then the fourth. One by one, he loaded his arms. They grew heavier with each one. His legs trembled, his knees buckling under the impossible weight, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't leave them there. As he picked up the final bag, the whispers around him swelled, filling the air with strange words he didn't understand. The vendors began to move now, just slightly leaning forward, their cold smiles stretching too wide, their hands resting on the table like claws. "You've paid," one of them whispered. "You belong." Another hissed. Rio shook his head, staggering back. "No," he muttered under his breath. "No, no." But his voice was swallowed by the fog. When he looked up again, the mirror at the end of the table was glowing faintly. His own reflection stared back at him. Worse than before, his skin now cracked in places, black veins spreading up his arms and neck. His eyes, almost completely black, the reflection grinned. Behind him, the tall man finally stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet creaked like dry wood. He came to stand just behind Rio, leaning down to whisper, "The market never forgets. You will keep paying." Rio's breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded in his ears. And then just as suddenly the fog shifted, the table, the vendors, the whispers, all of it began to fade, swallowed by white. When the fog cleared, Rio was standing in his stall back in the city market. Morning light streamed through the open roof. People bustled past his stall, glancing at the neatly stacked produce on his table, the same fish, vegetables, and spices he'd bought in the forest. Everything was fresh, everything was perfect. But something in their eyes. One customer stopped, staring at him in horror. "Your hands," she gasped. Rio looked down. His hands were pale now, faint black lines running across the skin like cracks in porcelain. They still burned cold. But he smiled anyway, thin, empty. The whispers were still there. In his head, "You've paid. Keep paying." And the line of customers grew longer. The city market was alive with noise and color. The scent of fresh fish and herbs mingled with the chatter of buyers and sellers. But at Rio's stall, something felt wrong. People still came. They still bought his perfect goods. But no one lingered. No one smiled. Every once in a while, a customer would glance at his hands or at his eyes and then quickly look away. Rio barely noticed anymore. His mind was still in the fog, still hearing the whispers, still feeling the icy weight of those bags every time he restocked his stall. But someone was watching him at the far end of the aisle, behind a stack of crates. Sandy stood, his childhood friend, the one who'd first told him about the border market. He'd been watching Rio for days now. He'd seen how pale his skin had become. He'd seen the faint black veins snaking up his neck. And he'd seen what happened to the customers who kept coming back. Sandy clenched his fists. His gut told him something was deeply wrong. And tonight, he would find out when the sun set and the market closed. Sandy followed Rio through the alleys, past the edge of the city, onto the dirt road at the forest's edge. Rio never looked back. The faint sound of gamelan music floated through the night air, guiding him forward. Sandy stayed just far enough behind to remain unseen, but when Rio stepped onto the narrow path into the woods, Sandy froze because he could see the glow now faint lanterns deep in the trees, and he could hear the whispers too. A chill spread across his skin. His breath came out in clouds. He almost turned back. Almost. But then he saw Rio ahead of him, walking into the fog, the familiar bags in hand. his steps steady and calm as though this was just another trip to the grocery store and Sandy couldn't let him do it alone, so he followed. Step by step into the fog, step by step into the market, and the music grew louder, and the air grew colder, and the whispers began to call his name too. Sandy, Sandy. The fog swallowed Sandy whole as he stepped onto the forest path. The air turned icy, the music grew louder, and the lantern light ahead seemed to stretch and shimmer, leading him deeper. Rio's figure was just visible ahead of him, walking calmly, his arms weighed down by those familiar black bags. Rio. Sandy finally called, his voice cracked in the cold. Wait! But Rio didn't stop, he just kept walking. Sandy quickened his pace, the mist thickening around him, clawing at his skin. The path twisted under his feet, and suddenly there it was, the gate. Wooden, ancient, draped with brittle palm leaves, and beyond it, the market. Even from here, Sandy could see the rows of glowing lanterns, the silent vendors with their hollow smiles, the customers drifting between stalls like shadows. And Rio, standing at the table at the center of it all, his bags neatly lined up, his pale hands resting on the wood, his head bowed, as if in prayer. Sandy froze at the gate, every instinct screamed at him to run. But the whispers were already in his head. Come in. We've been waiting. You're already here. And when he looked down, his hands were full. 2 black bags, heavy, cold. He didn't even remember picking them up. His breath caught in his throat. He looked up again, and now Rio was staring at him. Those black, empty eyes glimmered faintly in the lantern light. And Rio smiled, slowly, painfully. Sandy stepped through the gate. The air inside hit him like a wall of ice. The vendors straightened. The whispers rose to a deafening hiss, and the tall man, the one with the wide-brimmed hat, appeared at the end of the table, just as he had for Rio before. One long finger pointed at the table. Put it down. Sandy's arms moved on their own, placing the bags on the table next to Rio's, and his fingertips burned where they touched the wood. The whispers subsided. The vendor smiled wider. The tall man nodded once, then melted back into the fog. Rio didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sandy already understood that in this place, you didn't leave. You just paid, and paid, and paid. The fog thickened again, swallowing the market whole. When the sun rose over the city the next morning, the market stalls bustled as usual. 2 of them, side by side, stood out neat and full of fresh goods, sold at impossible prices. Customers lined up as always. And behind the tables, 2 pale figures stood in silence, black veins crawling up their arms, faint smiles frozen on their cracked lips. Rio and Sandy, waiting for the next name the market would call, because the market never forgets, and it always takes its due.